that's hopefully gets you guys a little bit of the mindset of why we're starting today and why disability sensitivity is so important. Those are all quotes straight from people that experience disability every single day. And it's things that they want people who don't have disabilities to understand about their lives. As you can see, there was a lot of things about just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there, and a lot about that we experience our lives in our own way. It doesn't mean that it's any different, or that just because it's different, that it's any less than a regular life. So who are we and why are we here today? Hillary Plog was supposed to lead today. She's the head trainer of QCCAN. She couldn't get today off of work, so instead you're stuck with us. I'm Mary Kiolbasa. I'm a junior here. I'm the founder and president of Viking Pups.
I'm Allie Roehrebeck. I'm also a junior, and I helped get it going. Her idea, but I was like the second person to come in. So.
And the vice president.
Oh, and vice president, sorry.
So like I said, the biggest part that a lot of them were talking about is that you can't always tell what a disability looks like. So typically coming to mind when people hear disability, things like a wheelchair, that's what the symbol obviously is on a reserved parking, things like that. Disability obviously elicits a lot of physical thoughts to a lot of people. And that's a big aspect of a lot of disabilities, but it's not the only kind. Those are the obvious and apparent examples, but there's a lot of invisible disabilities as well. Things like seizure disorders, psychiatric disorders, cardiac, diabetic, all those other things all range in that invisible illness. So it's the biggest aspect of just because you don't know what someone's suffering with, it doesn't mean they're not suffering. And that's a big thing that comes out of today that we want you to know. It's that thing of you can't judge a book by their cover. Just because someone looks like something's not wrong doesn't mean that it isn't.
So what is a disability? Well, a disability defined by the ADA is something that interrupts a major life activity. So something like walking, seeing, just normal natural things that we all take for granted. And some people, there's kind of a gray area, what is legally a disability versus not? So like, we give the example like allergies. Someone could be lactose intolerant. That's, it can be a little bit of a medical condition. You try and stay away from dairy, but if you get it, you're not going to do really major damage. But there are some things, some allergies that a dog can be trained to sniff for that if you come into contact with it, it could send you an anaphylactic shock and kill you or could knock you out or something along those lines. So there are some issues that are medical conditions, but not necessarily something that is legally disabled that would be covered by the ADA. And there are a couple different legal disabilities. There's physical, psychological, and cognitive. Physical, they're a little bit easier to see. There's like amputees, people in wheelchairs, crutches, canes, walkers. Those are a little bit more easier to see. The psychological, more of the mind, something you necessarily can't see, like PTSD, some severe cases of depression, like bipolar, but a major one is PTSD. You see it a lot with like veterans and stuff, but it doesn't just go to veterans. It could be anyone, a rape victim, something like that. And a developmental child with autism, or Downs, or Williams syndrome, something like that. And then where does a disability come from? It can come from birth. It can be obtained, or it could be through aging. So from birth, something like cerebral palsy, spinal muscular atrophy, something that they're just born with. But it also could be obtained through a car accident, a disease, an illness. You just never know. And then aging, just you get older, your eyesight starts to go, your hearing gets a little bit worse, stuff like that.
So the big thing to remember with the fact of how she was differentiating between a legal definition, what you experience every day, and even things like social securities, everywhere defines a disability differently. So people can have a disability that's diagnosed by their doctor that they experience every day that might not be covered by the ADA. Or you can have something that's covered by the ADA that your doctor diagnoses that the government doesn't approve to put you on disability. Or everywhere has kind of these different varied definitions between what a disability is and what it isn't. And so that's where these gray areas fall in. The biggest aspect when we come back down to our service dogs, like she touched on, is that it has to affect a major life activity. It can't just be that every once in a while, once a month I have this little issue. It has to be a major life activity. It has to have something that really interrupts the greater well-being of your day-to-day activities.
And then, so what does a disability look like? She touched on a little bit, but there's obvious apparent ones and then hidden and invisible ones. Okay, so the obvious ones, wheelchair, cane, whatever. But some of the hidden, invisible ones, someone who has seizures or is a diabetic, you can't, by looking at someone, unless you see the pump, but sometimes they're hidden, you can't tell if that person has a disability. So
disability etiquette is another really big thing. As we talked about, all of them have really specific ways that somebody wants to be treated having a disability. Same way that everybody wants to be treated fair and kind anyways. It's no different when you have a disability. So the first thing that I want to kind of ask everybody is, what are some of the words that come to mind when you want to refer to someone with a disability? What's things you hear every day? That is a question.
yeah.
That elicits answers.
Handicap.
Say Trevor. Say Trevor.
Come on, guys, don't be shy.
Doesn't mean it's something you use. Just what are things you hear? Okay.
Physically or mentally challenged.
There's other ones out there.
Differently able.
That's a good one.
Okay. So the first couple examples were really, really bad ones. We don't like those. Handicapped is an example that is removed from mainstream usage. If you notice, and that's why I know Trevor doesn't use it. Don't worry. Trevor was jumping up. He's one of our handlers. He was giving that so that someone answered. If you look at those blue placards nowadays, the accessible parking signs don't say handicapped anymore.
Unless they're archaic,
Yeah.
and they need to be replaced.
They say accessible. They say reserved parking. Or they just have the sign. The sign is actually now used. Those with disabilities have taken it over to mean an empowering thing. Doesn't bother anyone. Handicap? Not a cool word. Differently able? People have actually taken that to be a good thing. Things like impaired and crippled? Not cool. Think about what comes to mind when you hear that. What do you think about when you hear handicapped? What does that make you think of?
Weakness.
Weakness is a good one. What else do you like? What emotions does it elicit?
Pity.
Does it elicit anything else for anyone else? Pity's the big one. You feel bad. Something happened. Oh, they're so sad. Clearly they're out and about. They have just as good of a life as anybody else. They've overcome whatever did happen, and they're fine. We don't want to be pitied.
No.
So there's no reason that that word needs to be about. Accessible is the common word. If you heard how we've been referring to it, person with a disability. Same way that they said there, person first. How would someone describe Allie?
Come on, guys,
Give me a couple, how would you put it out there?
it's my hair color, eye color, whatever.
Exactly. If Allie ran into this room and then she left and I was looking for her, I'd be like, hey, did anyone see that girl with the dark hair? She was wearing a blue shirt. It's always she was doing something. The girl's first. She owns her things. It's her adjectives. It's no different for someone with a disability. She was in the wheelchair. Did you see that girl who had a service dog come through here? Did you see the girl with this? Did you see the girl with that? She owns those things, or he owns those things. Our disability is just an aspect of that person. It doesn't control them. It's not the autistic boy. It's a boy with autism. It's not the retarded girl. Because that word, whoa. It's the boy who has a developmental disability. It's not these things that own them. They own their disability. It's an aspect of them. It's an adjective you use to describe them. If you can't think of anything else. Just because the girl's in a wheelchair, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that can describe her. She also has a hair color. She also was wearing some outfit. You can describe all those same things first. None of that triggers something, then sure, the girl in the wheelchair. But the girl comes first. The person is always that entity. The same way that you would give that person anything else first. The same way that as you're sitting here, I could look at any of you and say, the person with, the person who's wearing, the person. The person is always the first thing. Would any of you guys like if I came up and was like, oh, the glasses girl, the camera girl, no. You're now all owned by these things. Last time I checked, your clothes don't own you. Your hair color doesn't own you. A disability doesn't own the person. The person owns that. It's just a part of them that they've overcome and they've come to control. It's something that they live with every day, and they're used to it. They adjust it, and it's part of them, but it's a part of them that they control and they overcome. Don't let it be something you think controls them. And there's also ways then that you address it. Aside from just describing it as the second part, there's things like if you're talking to someone who's deaf, you don't talk to the interpreter. You're right, just because the interpreter's the one that's going to can hear you. Still, like, that would be like if I came up and I knew that I was talking to someone who spoke a different language. You still talk to the person first. They're going to catch a couple words off your lips. They're going to catch a couple things off that, and it's just common courtesy that you speak straight to them. They're going to look at you first, then they're going to look at the interpreter and catch the other couple things. If you're talking to someone in a wheelchair, sit down. Be at their eye level. It's those common things that you make that person a person. Don't dehumanize them. You wouldn't want them to do the same thing either. Would you want someone who only spoke sign to come in and not bring an interpreter and sit there and just all ignore you? You want common courtesy back? Elicit common courtesy as well. It goes for the same thing with a service dog. Don't come in and only address their dog. Come in and address them. Most people, if you address them and you ask questions about their dog, they're usually really proud. If you tell us how awesome my dog is doing, I've worked really hard on that dog. I'm okay with you telling me, Emmy's doing awesome today. Yeah, I know. But if you come in and go, Annie, are you such a good girl? Last time I checked, she doesn't talk. She's not going to answer. And you've now just made me feel like I don't exist. We get that every day. Someone with a disability, 9 times out of the 10, is treated like they don't exist. Make sure that they exist. You can tell them how awesome their dog is. You can ask them their dog's name. But when you walk up to the dog and ask the dog their name, the dog's not going to answer you. The person's the one that can answer you.
And I guarantee they will not answer you if you ask the dog their name.
And that's when you're going to get them that they treat you pretty rude, because you've just treated them like they don't exist. They're this wall that is there to take care of a dog. No, the dog is there to take care of them. The dog is their piece of medical equipment. That's how it's legally defined. I guarantee you they love that dog a lot more than they love any of their other medical equipment. But legally defined, by law, that dog is medical equipment. She's not a pet. She's not anything else. She's not a dog. She's a piece of medical equipment. She's defined the same as a wheelchair. So you should treat her the same. Ask the person about her. Ask what she does, how long they've had her, where they got her. But ask her that. Ask the person that. Make sure the person, again, owns that dog. So, going on to that, we're going to continue with more service dog etiquette. Of why else you don't distract that dog. Like I said, you can ask that person about it when the person's behaving. Or when the person's behaving. When the dog's behaving. If they're in the middle of a task, you're not going to be like, oh, by the way, what's that dog's name? Like, as the dog is picking up something for him. When you guys are just standing in line to check out, there's no reason you can't ask them about it. Like I said, most handlers, those dogs are a pride and joy, whether it's the person that's training them or the person that lives with them. We spent a lot of time and effort in these dogs. Well, again, the person that raises them and the person that spends the rest of their life with them. Like, spend every day with them. Believe me, we love them. We're fine talking about them. But if you interrupt us in the middle of a training exercise, we're not so thrilled to talk about them. If you interrupt the person in the middle of the time that the dog is like doing deep pressure therapy for them, they're not going to want to talk to you about him. The dog is helping them with an actual task. They're not going to want to talk to people. So make sure that you find the appropriate time to talk to them. And again, talk to them, because not only is it rude to be talking to this dog instead of them, but it's distracting that dog. And you don't know what tasks that dog does for the person. Whether it's a mobility dog that, by distracting them, the dog could pull the wheelchair somewhere it doesn't belong. And just because the person's not in a wheelchair doesn't mean it's not a mobility dog. There's a lot of people that have muscular disorders that need mobility dogs. And you distract that dog, the dog can pull that person over. They can have weak enough muscles that you could be knocking that person over, causing them to have a head injury, things like that. You can have that severe of a consequence just by talking to a dog. Or it can be someone with a psychiatric disorder. That for you talking to that dog causes them a severe enough panic attack that they now don't know what to do, and that dog can't do a task such as covering them where it's supposed to, blocking them, because you've distracted them. That littlest thing is a distraction to that dog. That dog's whole job is to be there to focus on that person. And so it seems really cute of, oh, it's a fluffy little puppy. Guys, you've all seen dogs before. You're gonna go home and see a dog again sometime. you're gonna go to a park and there's gonna be another dog. Like, there's dogs everywhere in the world. This one isn't the one to get all excited and fluffy over. When they have vests on, it's not a dog, it's medical equipment. Its job isn't to be there and be fluffy to you. Its job is to be there working. And there's times where honestly, like, you get people in public that are like, seems like they've never seen a dog before. I promise you've seen dogs before. And if you haven't, just go Google fluffy puppy. You'll get your fill. There's fluffy puppies all over the internet. Like, it'll get your excitement filled. But things like distracting these dogs, sneaking those pets, it only can interrupt these dogs and make them miss important tasks that they need to be doing for this person. Like I said, all it takes is that one moment. What if that dog's job is to smell blood sugar for that person? And in that moment that you distract it and you get all excited because you pet it, and he turns to see what was happening behind him, in that moment the person's blood sugar is dropped, and they miss that alert, and the person doesn't test their blood sugar. There's a lot of consequences that cascade from that. There's a lot of consequences that cascade from any distraction to that dog. And I know it seems so silly in the moment when you're like, I only waved to it. But your wave is what took that dog out of its working mode. And yeah, when they get older, there's a lot of handlers that when we place these dogs, let the dog in a proper circumstance say hi. Because that handler is the one that knows when they're able and when they're not able. But if the dog doesn't learn when they're in training, when it's okay and when it's not okay, then they can't know that later. We have to teach these dogs it's never okay, because it's a black and white circumstance. Only the handler later knows. So we, for example, have to teach this dog that it's never going to be okay, because the handler's the one that's going to know later, okay, right now, I don't need any mobility things. I can sit down. This kid came over, this kid was afraid of a dog. I'll let them say hi once. So you're right, there's a lot of people that always come up and they're like, well, I saw this dog out in public say hi. Real service dogs, once they've been trained in the hardest way possible, a black and white, you never say hi in public, they can learn that it's okay every once in a while. It's like a toddler. When you're little, you learn that rules are black and white. Things are good and bad. And then when you get older, we all know now that there's gray areas in life. But it takes a while. It takes time of learning black and white. Yes or no, good and bad. And then you learn that, oh, sometimes there's a little bit of gray area. But you have to train them the other way first. You have to take an in-training dog and tell them, no, you never say hi to anyone but us. You never elicit attention. You never get distracted. Because that way when they're placed with their future person, they understand that the only person they ever work for, the only person they ever talk to, is the one they're working for. And so it's something that you can step up and help other people with too. Everywhere this person goes is the other thing you have to understand. It's not like you're the only person that they walk into the store and you're the only one that asks them. They take this dog everywhere they go. Everywhere they ever go, every person they ever see is excited to see this dog. Imagine if every errand you ran, you want to run into that store and run in for 5 minutes, and you get stopped at every door you open. So you open the freezer to grab a lean cuisine and you get stopped. You go grab the meat out of the freezer, you get stopped. You go grab something else, you get stopped. That 5-minute errand now just took an hour. You still have 5 other errands to run, and they're each also going to take an hour. It's not as fun as it seems. By the end of trying to tell everyone, no, you can't distract my dog, it's not nearly as fun as it seems. So if you can go a couple places and have people that understand, oh, that dog is working, the patch that says working dog, do not pet, really means what it says, it's a really nice concept. So the other reasons that go with these service dogs are the laws that protect them. And those laws really mean what they say. There's a big issue right now going on of people that like to try to skirt around these laws. These dogs are specifically trained and are getting specifically trained to help someone that has that legal definition of a disability. They need to mitigate a major life activity. And the specific part to a service dog is they have to be trained with a task. They can't just make you feel good. Those dogs that just make you feel good are called an emotional support animal. So if Fluffy at home makes you feel all warm and cuddly, he's an emotional support animal. An emotional support animal, though, still has to help someone with a disability. That's the issue right now. There's websites online that say, take your pet anywhere you want, they're an emotional support animal. Not true. You still have to have a disability to have an emotional support animal. You have to have a doctor that writes a note and says you need this animal to make you feel better because of your disability. They just don't have to be task trained. A dog that has to be task trained is a service dog. They specifically have to do something that mitigates your disability. Even those with PTSD, the dog is specifically trained. It's things like deep pressure therapy, things like that specifically slow their heart rate, do things like that. It's physiological changes in the body that help the person get over their panic attacks and things like that. So the law protects those dogs. Service dogs are protected by a federal law. They can go anywhere because they're defined as medical equipment, the same as a wheelchair, a cane, any of that. They can't be denied access anywhere that's public. Private gets to make its own decisions, but anywhere that's public and open to the public has to allow a service dog. So they can go anywhere. Service dogs in training are designated on a state-to-state basis. So Illinois has a white cane law that allows service dogs in training public access as well. That's why we get to train our dogs. Again, private makes its own decisions. Augustana was nice enough, obviously, to let us train our dogs here. So we're very grateful for that opportunity.
Yes, very much so.
They, again, are all individually trained, different dogs, different things. So mobility dogs are trained different than a psychiatric dog. Every dog is task trained in its individual way for the individual client. Again, service dogs and emotional support animals, I already explained. There's a third type that's a therapy dog. That's your pet that you train nicely. Usually it passes a thing like it's canine good citizen test, and you take and visit other people to make them feel better. So that's another thing that kind of also gets confused between service animals every once in a while. Service dogs can also be called like guide dogs, which are with the seeing eye, assistance dogs, and working dogs. The other kind is a skilled companion, which is basically trained kind of like a service dog, but it usually just stays home instead of going out in public. We already explained all the types, like I said. Mobility, which will help someone that has typically a physical disorder, psychiatric service dogs that work with someone that has a psychological disorder. And then there's a lot of just mix. For example, you have an alert dog that'll work with a diabetic alert, and response dogs that help send off alarms after things that have happened. So does anyone here have any questions?
What is deep pressure therapy?
Deep pressure therapy can be done in a lot of different ways. It's most commonly used in psychological dogs and in like pain cases. It slows down the heart rate and it can like ease the physiological responses to things like anxiety and stress and panic responses. I have a Emerson. Hi. So if anyone remembers Bo last year, he did hug. Emerson.
No.
Pressure. Good girl. So this is another form of deep pressure therapy that Emmy is learning for her client. Yeah, this is a girl. You knocked it away. Okay. So it's by them putting their entire body weight. It actually has a very similar, if anyone knows what a kangaroo hold is for babies, it has a very similar response to that. Uses their force of their body kind of like a weighted vest. Their force of their weight, as well as their heart rate and things like that, actually slow your heart rate and your physiological responses as well. Good girl. Good pressure. Okay. Yeah, if anyone wants to see what I have a question.
What happens with people who have allergies to dogs? How does that work when you've got a service animal and they have access to places, but then you have people who might be allergic?
That's a good question, Dr. Rose.
I'm just always curious because
Yeah, it kind of depends on the seating arrangements of the location, but typically if the accessible seating's there, for example, I guess the only place really that's the exception is an airplane, but anywhere else, it's not really the person that has the service dog's job to make adjustments, unless there's too much of a confined space, and then it's really the place's job to kind of try to make sure that both people are separated. I think the biggest place we always get is movie theaters. People tend to be like, I'm allergic, you have to move. But if you're in the accessible seating area, there's not really anywhere else for you to go. Or if you're by like the bar where there's the most space, it's your job to not try to like purposely go sit and like make it uncomfortable for someone. But if you're already there and someone comes by you, it's not your job to move. You both together kind of have to make a reasonable accommodation for each other. So it's not ever the person that has a service dog's job that they have to just like up and leave because someone has an allergy. So again, the other place is like in a private section you have to do it. So like in a classroom, we try to sit out of the way. If we know someone else has allergies, we'll sit like in the back of the class and let them sit up front, something like that. We'll try to separate ourselves. On a plane, you notify that you have a service dog, so then they can tell someone else, like if someone says they have an allergy, they can offer them a separate flight, because that's obviously the only place where like the dander really up there. Very few, I won't say none, but very few dog allergies are really where like just being in contact with the allergen is severe. Typically it's like you have to be petting them, because otherwise it would be that everyone you come in contact with has dog allergens on them, typically, if they've ever been in contact with a dog. You carry the hair on you. So typically just being separated is good enough. It's the same thing for like fear of dogs. You don't have to move. It's kind of that person's like, okay, you can move another table or chair over. Again, the only exceptions are places like private. We try to kind of be nice around here and say like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go sit over there, and make sure we have enough space so that you are comfortable and we are comfortable.
How do you teach a dog to smell low blood sugar?
It's kind of the same as like the drug sniffing dogs. You actually take a sample from someone who has diabetes, and you start typically a little bit below what the actual sample you want them to respond to is. And so you can use saliva, sweat, or blood, because all of those have your, the scent of the blood sugar. That's what they're responding to in. And you use that and a regular so that you make sure that you know that you're not just like smelling the general, oh, sweat is really good. They're responding to blood sugar in the sweat. And you get them to smell it and respond to it. And then you tell them, neutral is nothing. Smell to it, yay. Neutral, nothing. You go back and forth and they get excited over responding to that. And then you'll kind of move it around and they have to go alert to that whenever they smell it.
Are you allowed to say what tasks these three are being trained for?
Yeah, so Carver is our is being trained for seizure response. So his job is going to be responding to the seizures of his little girl, which we can show you a little bit of what he's going to be doing. His job is going to be sending off an alarm system in her room, then opening the door and going and getting her parents and telling her parents that she's had her seizure, and then going back to the little girl. So this is to be generalized into the alarm.
Yep.
We'll eventually do that.
Yep.
And so she obviously has a really rare form of epilepsy. So that he'll watch over her at night so that she can sleep in her own room, but her parents cannot worry that she's ever having a seizure that they are not aware of. So the paw is for once he's opened the door and he's gone to her parents, he'll paw them awake until they're aware that they need to wake up and go get her. Tug.
Good job, good boy.
And then the tug will be used to be able to, there's a mechanism you can put on the door where a dog can tug down something and it'll open the door.
So then Emmy's kind of our hodgepodge. She's got some psychiatric, she's got some guide work. So she's going to be doing quite a lot of different tasks. One of the biggest things that QC prides ourselves on is we custom train every single dog. Depending on your organization you go to, some big organizations just train kind of every dog the same, and it's like, here's your dog, pick which tasks you need to use, but every dog has an arsenal of the same tasks. We don't do that. We custom train every dog. So it's like, you give us your application, tell us what you need, and we go, okay, we can do that. So sometimes some dogs are just like a seizure response or a mobility, and some dogs are like, you're a little bit of everything. So Emmy's a little bit of that, which has been really fun. So we already saw her deep pressure therapy. She's also starting to learn some other varied things. Hi. Hey, how you doing? No. No, you're not going to sit. So she's going to be retrieving objects. Take it. Give. Good girl.
So yeah, so this is kind of the beginning stages of Take It. First you have to teach the dog to actually take it, and then we work down to where the object will be on the ground, and then we work to where it will be a distance from her. So it's kind of a progression. It's called, we're shaping the behavior. So this is a little farther along, but eventually it'll be placed somewhere and we'll go take it, and we'll assign a name to it so we can say take it phone, and she can go all the way up the stairs, grab it, and bring it back.
Good girl. And the next part, for when she'll need to ride to get things that are above her. She just started learning this Friday, so let's see how well we do. Hey. Rise up. Good girl. Off. That's a good girl. And she's too young to have really started her guide work yet. But soon enough, she's going to start. And she's going to start with where she'll be able to find things. So you'll be able to tell her, like, to find the door. She'll be able to lead her person out to the door. She'll be able to kind of get her out of the situation. Then she'll find a car, and she'll go get her out of the situation, get her all the way out to her car. Things of that nature. And she'll have a cool little guide harness. And Westy Man is totally different from these two. He is actually going to be working in a child advocacy center, and he's going to go through the court systems. He's going to help little kids that have been victims of abuse testify against their abusers. So he's really special. He's actually what's called a facility dog. So it's kind of along those same lines of a therapy dog. I kind of call it always, it's kind of where service meets therapy. So it doesn't have public access, but it's trained exactly like our service dogs. It's put through the same rigorous service training so that they are exposed to everything here on campus. They're used to everything, so that when they have to go to the courts, they have to go to the police station, to the hospital, to the child advocacy center, nothing phases them. But then that is what they are. They're a professional therapy dog. They're going to work with that. They're going to go to the court system. He's going to have all those skills.
Their quote-unquote chin or snout, like right on your leg, and just look at you with these adorable eyes.
We tease that these two are the exact opposite right now because his entire body grew over break. His chest got huge, but his head, not so much. His head grew, but the rest of his body didn't catch up yet. So we pretty much need to mix those two. Do you guys have any other questions?
Any dog specific or?
How long does training in general and overall?
Yeah, typically a service dog takes about 2 years.
Our facility dogs can go a little sooner just because they don't do as much rigorous things, especially with like physical stuff with weight bearing, because that's a big thing is we have to wait for them to develop physically first before they can do certain things. So our facility dogs can go a little quicker.
Yeah, our facility dog program's about a year. The service dogs are 2 years. More.
Question?
How do dogs get chosen to be concepts?
Oh, that's a good question. So when they're in their litter, you go and you temperament test them. And temperament tests are interesting. You look for a lot of very specific characteristics in a service dog. So believe it or not, one big thing you want in these dogs is independence. Everyone kind of assumes you want that dog that's like following you around and Mr. Cuddly Pants. It's actually not something you want. Because first off, that's going to signal that they're going to want to go do that with every Joe Schmo and Playboy too. You want that dog that's kind of interested, comes up to you and is like, what are you? Who are you? But then it's like, okay, see you later. Like goes back to their corner, wants to go do what they want. Because an independent dog is a good thinker. They're going to want to figure things out. They're going to want to think through that problem you give them, which is a lot of what you do in training. That's how you do a shaping process. You reward them for one thing, and then when you stop rewarding, it's how you get them to do the next thing. They have to think like, okay, well, I did what I usually have to do, but I didn't get rewarded. What do I do next? And a thinker pushes themselves. They figure it out. And they often, the same way that, for example, you saw Westy just putting his head there, they think through things. They're like, I'm not getting anything right now, what do I do? And they just start to problem solve on their own. So you want the dog that does that, that's kind of off in the world, doing his own thing while you're there. Then you also want that dog that reacts to things, but isn't scared. So for example, we'll open an umbrella. We'll drop something that makes a little bit of noise. You want the dog that kind of looks at it, comes over maybe and investigates it, but isn't like startled or scared by it. Or if they are, then they come back and they investigate it once they're done being startled.
It's called a recovery. You really want a dog that can recover.
Yeah. So they can be startled, but then like she said, they have to recover. They have to realize like, oh, I see you now. This umbrella, you're open, you're not scared. So for example, Carver was actually someone that recovered right away. The first time the umbrella was opened, he was like, whoa, you're really big. We took a whole golf-size umbrella. He was kind of like, wow. Then he came over, took it in his mouth, and tried to drag it, even though it was 3 times his size. So that's like a perfect recovery. It was like, kind of freaked me out, but now I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to steal you. You are mine. So he like conquered this fear of it. It's exactly what you want in a dog. So you do little things like that. Then you'll also kind of pick them up, see what they do. Usually do that, flip it over, see if like an alpha dog personality is not something you want, because we're alphas, they are not the alpha. So you're going to see, like, are they at that time like, oh my god, no! I'm in charge that whole time. Do they tuck their tail? Are they terrified of being put in a submissive position? Because you also don't want the dog that's like, not just a beta, but like the absolute like
You don't want an omega.
loser of the pack, and is like, I can't handle this, I'm so sorry. That's not going to train well either. You're going to spend the entire time just building up their confidence, you know. So you want that dog that like, you put them in the submissive position and they're like, yeah, cool. See you in a little bit. Like, they're relaxed, their tail's loose, they're just like, what are we gonna do next? And then you flip them back over and you put them down, they're like, okay, what's cool, what's next? Like, you need those just key personality traits. So then when you find that one, this is one you know you're going for. Good questions?
You said in public we're allowed to ask people about their service dogs. When you guys are training them, are we allowed to ask you about them as well?
I think actually you tend to find that people that are raising tend to be a little bit more open to asking questions because again, as you've heard, the first thing we tell all of our handlers is our job is not just to train the dog, but to train the public. We know that one of the first things that we're going to do is never lose an access challenge and never, you know, so I know that whenever I go out, I'm used to answering a million trillion questions, you know, so I think that people that are raising, especially because we go into this for the passion of raising, so I'm always open to being like, yeah, Emmy does all these things, like, I'm raising her to do all of this, I love doing this every day, you know, so you get really used to answering all the questions.
But kind of like watch out, if you see they're doing a task or doing something, wait till they're done, then ask them. So we get kind of frustrated when we're trying to work them through something and like saying we're trying to get them to make this big breakthrough. We don't want interrupted because we're trying to get the dog where it needs to be. But so if you like wait a few seconds, it normally doesn't take that long, then we would love for questions. So.
And I think the other thing I would say is also be careful, obviously remember what you're asking the person if you are asking them. Like the same reason, there's 2 legal things a business can ask someone when you bring in a dog. Is that a service dog? And what tasks does the dog do? So you should kind of remember those same things. Don't be like, hey, what's your disability that dog treats? Like,
No.
do you know that person well enough to really be asking what their medical disability is? No. Like, you know, that's a little too personal. Like, even if you know, like, oh, well, it's a mobility dog. Like, you're not going to walk up to someone that's, like, in a wheelchair and ask them, like, well, how'd you get in that? Like, really? I'm going to look at you and be like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, you need to leave right now. Like, so, you know, remember where the boundaries are, though, too. You can ask them, like, what tasks that dog does. Like, oh, I saw that dog retrieving. That was awesome. The dog's really cool. And, like, sometimes the person's going to tell you really cool things, and sometimes the person's just going to kind of be like, yeah, they do a couple of these tasks. You know, like, I've had some really, really nice conversations with fellow service dog raisers, and I've had some where I'm like, oh, well, I just told you all about my dog, and you just told me your dog's name. Cool. Like, so sometimes, you know, some people are just kind of like, they just don't feel like talking that day, and sometimes you're going to have great conversations, and you just have to remember that, again, you might have been the 10th person that day that asked that question, so.
Yes, that's good. Good girl.
What we do in our program is we start your first year mentoring under our head trainer who has over a decade of experience. She's trained at a lot of different service dog organizations as well as private training, show training, a whole bunch of different stuff. So what we started at our first year is we've been training under her for the last 3 years. We started our freshman year and came in and spent 3 hours at least every week just sitting listening to all of her obedience and her service work and her therapy dog work. So that's where we started. All of our handlers spend the same way. They spend their first year just sitting, observing us, observing our handlers, and then observing her as it comes later. And so then they apply at the end of the year to become a handler and kind of move up through there.
And even now, we still will talk with our head trainer for like hours upon end. Some of you guys may know, to keep learning, and then we find different ways to do stuff and something that's easier for the dog and stuff. So we're always learning.
Yeah.
You never stop learning. If you do, you're never going to be a successful trainer.
We may or may not spend weekends researching things and then bring them to her. May or may not be service dog nerds.
Next question.
You have any other questions?
Is the public typically understanding the concept, or are they very?
It really depends.
It's very mixed.
Yeah, I'd say the suburbs are actually really good. The Chicagoland suburb area is very open, and I think it helps that like there's a decent number of organizations up in the suburbs. The Quad City area was a little difficult when we first began.
It's gotten a lot easier.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it really goes on a case-to-case basis based on the areas. I know some organizations that like have had just horrendous lawsuits that they just spend all of their time in lawsuit after lawsuit because like they just can't find anywhere that is okay with public access. And then you find somewhere I'm like, I've really only had like a couple really bad experiences. And you have some places that like you have one bad experience and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like we did a very similar presentation to this at a company in Davenport that they denied access to one of our clients. So it was actually her and her service dog. They have absolutely no legal right to say no, and they did. And so we kind of said, okay, your two options are we can sue you, or we can give a presentation to your you and your staff about how to never make this mistake again. You're like, yeah, we'll choose that one. We're like, yeah, that sounds good to us too. And so we went and gave them a presentation, and they were all, very open. And so it's kind of like you can go down the two roads always. But that was, I think, one of really our only worst. But like we've had handlers be followed in Target before by managers, and I think it really all kind of depends on like how you take it. Because that very same Target, we've had ones where we came in without a dog. His vest was like still being embroidered. So we went straight to the manager, by the way, and we're like, okay, so these are our service dogs in training. His vest isn't here right now, so they're in bandanas. I know it doesn't look like service, and the manager's like, oh, cool, and like radioed all of their staff. So like, it really kind of just depends on those case-to-case basis.
Yeah.
Good. We've taken them really unique places too, and like never had issues like taking them to the zoo. We've flown, we've taken them on buses, and like.
And it's weird, those rare cases we've never had issues, but I've been asked to leave before like at a dentist office, and I was like, no, you can't. I even got to the point where I had to get my head trainer on the phone because they wouldn't believe me, and I was just stumped of what I needed to do. And then afterwards they're like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, give me her address, I need to apologize. So it just kind of depends, and you just work through it. And ultimately it is our job. Why we stop and have those battles is because say someone else comes in with our actual service dog, we want their time to be so much easier, not to go through that hassle, because they're already going through enough issues. If we can make their lives easier just by talking or fighting a battle, we will. So.
Does the collars hurt the dogs?
So he's referring to our pinch collars. Pinch collars are actually the most humane training mechanism. So you'll constantly see a lot of pets use choke collars. Well, choke collars don't ever stop. Choke collar is just a rope that can go and go and go and go and go and go and go. And so those are most commonly the ones that get embedded and hurt the dog's larynx. Another common service dog training one is like gentle leaders. When used properly, those are fine. Unfortunately, those are often misused and can hurt a dog's neck because you can pull on it and hurt the dog's neck. So this speaks to dogs' pack mentality. The dog has a lot of scruff on their neck. That's where another dog would correct them. If mom dog wants to tell a little puppy that they're doing something wrong, they grab their scruff. If the alpha wants to tell another dog, if anyone in the pack wants to communicate, they grab their scruff and they tell them what they're doing, and the dog immediately goes like, oh, you didn't like that? Cool, got it. The pinches aren't these like sharp stabbing needles, which is kind of common misconception. They're rounded, they're blunt. Believe it or not, most of our handlers have worn them and corrected each other. They don't hurt. If a human can wear it and pop each other, they don't hurt. We have less skin than they have. They have that huge fluff there, and they don't bother them. If we can wear it, we can handle it. We mean they're okay. It has a locking mechanism, so it does a quick little pop and releases. That's why it's called a pinch. It pinches, lets go, dog goes, oh, sorry. When you hear someone like her talking, believe me, it's not when we pinch, it's afterwards, because she says no and talks back. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you get in a fight with your parents. You're not yelling because they corrected you, you're yelling because you're mad because you wanted to do what they were saying. That's what Miss Thing does. Miss Thing likes to talk back. She likes to say that she was doing what she was doing. She's working through that right now. The pinch doesn't hurt them. It's just a correction, and they realize that they made a mistake. So there's the alternatives. They get the positive rewards like treats when they're doing what's right, and they get a little correction if they do what's wrong.
Can I ask that question?
What?
Can I ask that question?
No.
If it's just one of our training things, just wait until after. Is there a hand up there?
How does the transition work after they're done training?
It's good. It's usually about a 3-month process. So it starts with where their handler, just their future client, starts coming to training, and will come through and start like going to obedience classes with them and seeing what they're doing. And then we'll start with like they go to 1 overnight there, and then come back to campus. We see how it went, and slowly but surely they're going to start doing like 2 and 3 nights there, and then come back. And so slowly but surely they don't notice, but they're spending more and more time with them and less time with us. It gives us time to work through if there was any issues at the house that they're spending time at, anything they weren't realizing. But then they get to come back, and then but by the end of it, they don't realize that they're spending all their time there and none of their time with us, and they're bonding with that person. So by the time we place them, they usually don't even realize that like they've left us. We're usually the ones that are more like, but it was only 3 months and I miss you. And the dogs are kind of like, sorry, Mom, what? And they're just off and happy, and they have no qualms in the world that they've just replaced.
Don't you guys miss the dogs when they get placed?
We do. It helps that we get to see them. They continue. We're not one of those organizations that's like, place, done, wipe our hands. They get to continue going to training for the rest of their time that the person has them. We have Wednesday trainings with all of our service and all of our therapy dogs, and they can continue going for the rest of the life of the dog. So we get to see a lot of our dogs forever, which is really nice. We get to make sure that there's no problems that the dog's having, no nothing. But also it helps that like you grab the next dog and you kind of just keep going and you grin and bear it. But yeah, we'll always miss them, and it's always sad, but it's always nice at the end of the day to know that like you helped someone. You made their life substantially better.
Do any of your clients ever have any pets?
Yeah, a lot of them do. We've had ones that have other dogs, cats, things of that nature. And that's another part of that transition process. You go meet them, make sure they're get along well, and kind of figure out how they're going to interact together. First, usually have them meet at a neutral territory before they go meet together at the house.
How does that work when you have other pets in the house? Because I know like some will like treat them differently because they are pets, and so does like that have any negative impact on the service dog's training?
Not really. Often with like other dogs, we have the other dog come to obedience class first, just so like the parents too and stuff can get used to like how to give commands. But I think they both kind of get equally jealous of each other.
Yeah, they do.
Because it's like the pet gets like special treatment in one area, but the service dog gets to go everywhere. So it's like they both have their special thing with the parents or with the client of that nature. You know, it's like, oh, well, you might get to sleep on the bed and I have to sleep in a crate, but then I get